A recent report from the Nigerian Port Consultative Council has shown that a drastic drop in vessel calls into the nation's port has plunged operations in the maritime sector into a major crisis as businesses continue to nosedive following the forex crisis and inflation currently militating against the economy. According to the Comptroller General of the Nigeria Customs Service, Adewale Adeniyi, there has been a drop of 4.5% in the number of vessel calls into Nigerian ports from 3,957 in 2022 to 3,778 in 2023. Adeniyi, who visited some of the terminals in Lagos, lamented that most of the terminals were empty, noting that import trade has dropped. He encouraged Nigerians to engage in more exports to boost the naira. Well, to get more reactions on this report, economist Sopitan joins me on the news. Thank you, sir, for your time. Now, this report by the NPCC underscores the challenges bedeviling the Nigerian economy. But what are your thoughts on the moves by the federal government in terms of increasing exports and boosting the naira, the value of the naira?
Well, thanks for having me. To be honest, I'm not sure what those efforts are. Speaking in terms of clear, specific, concerted efforts towards promoting exports in the last, I could even say in the last 5 years. What incentives have been put in place in terms of maybe legislative framework, in terms of regulatory framework, in terms of policy initiatives to encourage exporters, in terms of funding, providing export funding for operators in that sector. And there's precious little. There has been some efforts, no doubt, over the last 10 years. For example, the Central Bank of Nigeria under Godwin Emefiele came up with I think it was called the RX 100 or something like that, where there were some incentives provided by the central bank for people that were bringing export proceeds into the country. But we've seen precious little of this. And the truth of the matter is that if you look at, our economy today, besides petroleum products, what exactly do we export as a country? What exactly do we export? What products do we produce in sufficient quantities to guarantee that we can export, adequate quantities? It's precious little. So I don't see the effort from government, especially in terms of very clear, well-articulated policies that can encourage people to channel their investments into export-related activities. There simply isn't enough. We've got to do more if we want to see more results.
Let's talk about the role of the citizens here. What can citizens do to aid government's efforts? Well, the efforts that they say they are putting in to improve exports and consequently boost the value of the naira.
Well, look, there's very little that the average individual can do beyond their quest for survival on a daily basis. Of course, there are investors and corporate organizations, small businesses who may play in this sector. But I tell you, without clear efforts on the part of government to drive, activities in that sector, you won't get any results. These things don't happen by accident. So we need to see the government do far more in terms of encouraging citizens to channel their energies and their resources into pursuing exports. We have, the resources that we have at our disposal are almost limitless in terms of the things that we can do. We can go into talking about exportable products, but we have to be more deliberate about exploiting this, providing processing capacity locally, such that what we export are finished produce that we've added value to rather than raw materials. Whether you talk about the agricultural sector, or you talk about solid minerals, you talk about services, whatever you want to export, you've got to add value to it. So I think that government needs to look beyond oil, which is providing almost all of our export process, foreign exchange revenues, and start encouraging people to produce things that are of export quality that can compete across the world. But of course, you do know that there are a lot of challenges locally with infrastructure and a number of our
Mr.
other
But
ease of
could
business,
you,
doing
I'm
business
sorry to cut you short,
issues in
Mr.
Nigeria
Sopitan.
that prevents this from happening.
Right. Now, could the nation's high exchange rate also be a contributory factor affecting the drop in vessel calls in the country?
To be honest, I struggle to see the connection because the exchange rate affects duties mostly. Duties are important, but if you look at the overall landing cost of any produce or product, duties represent, depending on what products you're talking about, as low as 5%. Average duty rate is about 10%, 15%, and there are some items that you pay much higher than that. So the exchange rate on its own cannot explain these drops that we've seen. I think what we're experiencing is, on the other hand, is a drop in economic activity as a result of the challenges that we faced in the last year and a half. Inflation has been almost running out of control in the last 3 years, and that is telling. It's reducing the volume of economic activity that we have in the country. And then in the last year, once you then remove subsidy and hit the purchasing power of people, that would affect consumption. If consumption is affected, bearing in mind that our consumption is actually predominantly imported items, obviously that will then reduce the volume of things that you're bringing into the country. So I think it's more of a dwindling in a reduction in economic activity, and output that we're seeing playing out in this vessel calls than the exchange rate issue.
Now, the importers majorly are complaining about, the duty rate here. Could that also be a factor, a contributory factor?
The duty rate is important, and it's actually important to have that rate stable so that people can plan. If you can't plan as a business, you're bringing in goods into the country, you want to be sure how much those goods will land at in your country, which will then determine your selling price and how much profit you'll make. So if that rate changes too often, you may, especially if it changes significantly, then you may run into problems. But like I said earlier, I'm not sure that on its own can explain the drop in the volume of activity at the ports that we've seen. That's clearly an indication that consumption in the country is falling. Imports are reducing because we are simply not consuming as much products as we were doing maybe 10 years ago. So the duty issue needs to be addressed. We need to have some stability there. But the issues that we are confronted with as a country and as an economy are far more varied than just to narrow it down to the exchange rates on duties concern.
Right, then, economist Segun Sopitan, thank you very much, sir, for your insights.